The kitchen wasn't finished. It had a sink with no countertop around it yet, exposed studs where the cabinets would go, and a single bare bulb hanging from a cord that threw long shadows across the floor. Mark had sanded himself 18 months before he died. Maya was standing by the window he'd framed but never trimmed out, and the late October light was doing something to her face that made it hard to look at directly. She turned to me, and there was a stillness in her I hadn't seen before. Not the careful stillness of someone managing grief in front of other people, but something looser, something that had stopped performing entirely. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind that makes you aware of your own hands. And then she said something so quietly I had to replay it twice in my head before I was certain I'd heard it right. I'm not going to tell you what she said yet. I need you to understand what we were standing in the middle of first, because the sentence doesn't mean anything without the year that came before it. My name is Eli Marsh. I'm 35 years old, and I restore old houses for a living, which mostly means I spend my days arguing gently with buildings that have spent 80 years settling into bad habits and convincing them, one beam at a time, that they can still be lived in. I run a small outfit, 3 guys and me most weeks, restoring historic homes around the county, the kind of work where you spend half your time on your knees with a flashlight, discovering exactly how much a previous owner lied to themselves about a foundation. I'd been engaged once, in my late 20s, to a woman named Renee, and it ended the way those things sometimes do, not from any single failure, but from 2 people slowly realizing they'd been planning a wedding for a marriage neither of them actually wanted yet. We're still friendly. She sends a card at Christmas. Not bitter, just early for both of us, in a way that turned out fine. The years since had been quiet and mine. I refinished old porch furniture on weekends for no reason anyone could call practical. I ran most mornings, not well, and ate the same 5 dinners on rotation because deciding what to cook felt like a decision I didn't have the energy for after a day of other decisions. I was settled. I want to be honest that I was also, in a way I hadn't examined closely, waiting for something, though I couldn't have told you what. Mark Calloway and I had been best friends since we were 12 years old, the kind of friendship that starts over a shared bus seat and somehow survives every version of yourself you go on to become. He was the best man at nobody's wedding because he died 14 months before this story, on a Saturday morning, during a pickup basketball game with 3 other guys from the neighborhood, his heart simply stopping in a way no one saw coming and nothing could have prevented. He was 36. I got the call from one of the other guys while I was standing in a client's half-demolished kitchen, and I don't remember setting the phone down, only that someone told me later I had. Mark and Maya had been married 9 years. They had a daughter, Lily, who was 7 that October, sharp-eyed and unnervingly direct in the way only children and the very old manage to be. In the year after Mark died, I did what you do for people you love when you don't know what else to offer. I mowed the lawn without being asked. I fixed the porch step that had been loose since before Mark passed. I drove Lily to school twice a week when Maya's schedule at the flower shop made mornings impossible. And I never once thought of any of it as anything other than the bare minimum a person owes the family of his best friend. There was also the house. 2 years before he died, Mark had bought a derelict farmhouse outside town, all on his own, as a surprise project, the kind of thing he'd planned to finish slowly over a decade and hand to Maya on some future anniversary with the whole thing restored. He'd gotten the bones of it done with my help on weekends, the roof, the floors, half the framing, before he died, with the kitchen half finished, and a window he'd built, but never trimmed. I kept working on it. I told myself, and everyone else, that I was finishing it for Mark, that it felt wrong to let a half-restored house sit there as a monument to an unfinished plan. That was true. It was also not the whole truth, and some part of me knew, even that first winter, that I had quietly stopped being entirely sure who I was finishing it for. Before I go any further, If you're listening to this right now, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. These stories have been traveling further than I ever expected, and I genuinely want to know where they're landing. All right, back to it. I want to be precise about who Maya Calloway was to me, because it matters more here than it would in most stories. She was 34, dark-haired, with the kind of steadiness that looked, from the outside, like calm, and was actually, I'd come to learn, the specific discipline of a woman who had decided early that she would grieve on her own schedule and nobody else's. She ran a small flower shop on Mill Street that had belonged to her mother before her, and she had a habit, when she was thinking something she hadn't decided whether to say, of turning her wedding ring once around her finger with her thumb, a small motion she likely didn't know she made. She had known me exactly as long as she'd known Mark, because I'd introduced them, at 24, at a barbecue I'd half forgotten I was the reason for, until she reminded me, years later, with the specific dryness she used for facts, she found both true and slightly funny. She had been, for 11 years, simply Mark's wife and my friend, in that order, uncomplicated and fixed, the kind of relationship with a boundary so obvious it had never once needed stating out loud. I want you to sit with that, because I need you to understand exactly how far outside anything reasonable it was for me to be standing in an unfinished kitchen 14 months after burying my best friend, watching his widow in October light, unable to stop noticing the particular way she existed in a room. That was the kitchen from the beginning of this story. I'd driven out that Saturday to work on the window trim, the way I did most weekends, and Maya had come by after dropping Lily at a friend's, ostensibly to see how the cabinets were coming along. Actually, I'd realized later, because some part of her had wanted to see me without an obvious reason attached to it. We'd worked through the trim together for an hour, mostly quiet, handing each other tools the way Mark and I used to. At some point she found, tucked behind a stud where Mark had clearly meant to come back for it, his old work notebook, and inside it a sketch of a window seat for that exact window, with a note in his handwriting, for M, so she always has somewhere to sit and watch the light change. She held the notebook for a long time without speaking. Then she set it down very carefully on the unfinished counter and looked at me, and there was that stillness I mentioned, loose and unguarded, in a way I hadn't seen from her in 14 months. "I don't feel guilty when I'm with you anymore," she said. "I feel guilty about how much that scares me." I didn't have a response ready. I have never had a response ready for anything that woman has said to me. "Maya," I started, and she shook her head, not in refusal, just in the specific way that means, "Not yet. Let me finish." "I'm not saying it because I expect anything," she said. "I'm saying it because I've been carrying it alone for months, and I think it's making me strange, and you're the only person I've ever told an inconvenient truth to without rehearsing it first." I said the only honest thing I had. "I think I've been finishing this house slower than I needed to." She looked at the notebook, then at me, and something in her face did a small, careful thing. Neither agreement nor refusal, just acknowledgement, the way you nod at weather you can't control. "We should talk about that," she said. "Not today." "Not today," I agreed. We didn't talk about it that day. I drove home with both hands too tight on the wheel, replaying 6 words that had rearranged something I hadn't known was still standing. The second time was 3 weeks later, on what would have been Mark's 37th birthday, a date neither of us had discussed in advance, but both of us, it turned out, had cleared our calendars for without telling the other. I found her at the farmhouse, sitting on the unfinished window seat frame with a thermos of coffee, looking out at a field Mark had never gotten around to clearing. "I didn't want to be alone today," she said, "and I didn't want to make Lily carry that with me. So I came here instead." We sat for an hour without much talking, the specific kind of silence that doesn't need filling. At one point she said, looking at the field instead of at me, He would have liked that you kept going on the house. He would have liked it less, probably, if he knew exactly why. I don't know exactly why either, I said. I've stopped pretending that's entirely true. She didn't push it further. She let me have the half-honesty, the way I'd let her have her silences for a year. The third time, Lily was the one who said it. She'd asked, with the bluntness only 7-year-olds manage, why Eli came over so much now that the porch step wasn't broken anymore. Maya had stumbled through an answer about friendship and helping out, and Lily had considered this with great seriousness and said, "Okay, but I think he likes you the way Dad used to like you, just different." Then she'd gone back to her cereal as though she hadn't just detonated something in the kitchen, and Maya had gone very still, and neither of us had said anything for a long moment, because there is no good adult response to a child being more honest than either of you has managed to be. I knew, driving home that night, exactly what I was circling, and exactly how much it would cost to be wrong about it. Maya Calloway was my best friend's widow, not a technicality, not a boundary I could argue my way past with enough careful reasoning. If I let myself want this and I was wrong, I risked turning the one family I had left into something strained and careful around me forever. If I let myself want this and I was right, I would spend the rest of my life with people quietly wondering how long I'd been waiting for my best friend to die. I didn't think that was true. I wasn't certain I could prove it wasn't, even to myself, every single day for the rest of my life. I'd told myself for 14 months that I was finishing a house for a dead man. I'd started to suspect I'd actually been finishing a window seat for a living woman, and that the difference between those two sentences was the entire complication. Sitting right there, load-bearing, impossible to walk around. Hold on a second. I need to know something. Where in the world are you listening to this right now? Drop it in the comments. People have been leaving locations from places I've never even thought about, and it means more than I can explain. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There's another story coming next week, and you won't want to miss it. Okay, I'm back. Mark's mother, Diane, called me on a Tuesday, which she almost never did. Maya told me, she said, without preamble, in the voice of a woman who had decided to get the hardest sentence out before she lost her nerve. About the two of you. Whatever the two of you are. I sat down. Nothing's happened, Diane. I want you to know that clearly. I know, she said. She told me that too. That's not actually what I called about. A long pause. I called because I've spent 14 months watching you show up for that girl and that little girl in every single way my son would have wanted. And I keep waiting to feel something other than grateful about it. And it isn't coming. Her voice caught slightly. He loved you like a brother, Eli. I don't think he'd want you standing outside his family forever out of guilt for being alive. I don't know how to do this without it costing something, I said. Everything costs something, she said. I buried my son 14 months ago. I know exactly what that costs. This isn't that. She was quiet a moment. Be good to her. Both of them. That's all I'm asking. And it's the only thing I'm asking. I went to the farmhouse the following Saturday and found Maya in the kitchen, the window seat frame finally trimmed out, waiting for cushions she hadn't bought yet. I told her, plainly, that Diane knew, that she wasn't angry, that I needed to say the thing I'd been not saying since the day she found the notebook. I think I've loved you for longer than either of us is comfortable admitting, I said. Not instead of him, beside it somehow, in a way I don't fully understand, and can't make smaller, just because it would be easier to explain. She was quiet for a long moment, thumb turning her ring once around her finger. I've been waiting to feel like a different kind of woman before I let myself answer that, she said. I don't think that woman is coming. I think I'm just going to have to be this one, missing him and wanting you at the same time, and trust that those aren't actually in competition. They're not, I said. She crossed the unfinished kitchen and stood close enough that I could see exactly how much courage the next part was costing her. Can you kiss me? She said, without either of us pretending this is simple. Yes, I said, and I did. Slowly, carefully, the kind of kiss that asks a question and waits, genuinely, for the answer. When we pulled back, she pressed her forehead briefly to my shoulder and said, "This is going to be complicated." "I know," I said. "I'm not stopping anyway." "Good," she said. "Neither am I." It wasn't seamless, and the awkward parts are the parts worth keeping. Diane needed a few months of careful Sundays before her warmth toward me stopped feeling effortful and started feeling like itself again. Maya's sister asked, gently but directly, whether it felt too soon, and Maya answered her honestly. "It doesn't feel soon. It feels like the only thing that's made the missing him bearable, and I've stopped being ashamed of that." Lily, for her part, adjusted faster than any adult in the story, mostly because she'd already said the true thing out loud months before the rest of us caught up to it. "I already told Mom you liked her," she informed me one evening, with the satisfaction of someone who considered the matter long settled. "I don't need you to explain it again." Mark's old basketball friends, the men who'd been on the court the day he died, took me out for a beer about 2 months in, not to interrogate me, it turned out, but to tell me, in their own clumsy collective way, that Mark used to say I was the only person he trusted completely with the people he loved most, and that none of them thought he'd meant it as a warning. We finished the farmhouse together that spring, the two of us, and, on weekends, Lily, who took her job sanding small sections of trim with enormous seriousness. I built the window seat exactly the way Mark had sketched it, cushions and all, and the first afternoon it was finished, Maya sat in it with the light doing the same thing it had done that October day, and said, "He'd have liked seeing this exactly like this." "I think he would have," I said. In June, she handed me a key to the farmhouse, no ceremony, set on the half-finished counter, the way she set most things that mattered. "Lily wants to know if you're staying for good," she said. "I'd like to be able to tell her yes." I took the key, warm from her hand, and understood it for what it was. Not a key to a house I'd already spent 2 years rebuilding, but a key to staying in the family I'd quietly never wanted to leave. If this just hit you the way it hit me every time I tell it, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. People have been finding these stories from every corner of the world, and I want to know your corner. Subscribe if you haven't. A new story lands every week. Now let me finish this one. The things I kept from that first year and the ones after it. The notebook page with Mark's sketch, framed now and hung beside the finished window, where everyone who sat there could see whose idea it had actually been. A Tuesday in the second autumn when Lily asked, without any particular weight, whether I'd come to her school's father-daughter breakfast, and Maya watched my face while I said yes and didn't comment on what she saw there. A spring evening, almost 2 years after the day in the unfinished kitchen, when Diane came for dinner at the farmhouse for the first time and stood in the doorway of the finished kitchen for a long moment before saying, quietly, "He'd be glad it looks like this." And none of us needed to ask which this she meant. I never told anyone until just now that I'd known exactly why I was stretching the house out for so long. I think Maya had suspected it the whole time and let me arrive at the truth on my own schedule, the same patience she'd asked of herself. The window seat became, without either of us planning it, the place we sat most evenings, and it was there, 2 years almost to the day from the morning Mark called it for M on a scrap of paper, that I finally finished the last small thing I'd been saving. Maya was reading beside me, Lily asleep upstairs, when I reached under the cushion and took out a small wooden box I'd made myself, the kind of thing only someone who builds things with his hands thinks to do. I'm not going to pretend there's a simple way to ask this, I said. You already know every complicated thing underneath it. I just want you to know I've stopped thinking of it as complicated. I think it's just true. She looked at the box, then at the window, then at me, her thumb finding her ring one last time before she slid it off her own hand, slowly, and set it on the windowsill beside the framed sketch, where I understood she meant it to stay, honored and visible and no longer worn. Yes, she said, before I'd finished opening the box. Obviously, yes. I slid the new ring onto her hand, and from upstairs, entirely uninvited, came Lily's voice through the floor vent, half asleep. Finally, she said, and we both laughed, the real kind, surprised out of us at exactly the same moment. We tell it differently depending on who's asking. Her version: he kept rebuilding a house that was already finished long enough to fall in love with her by accident. My version: she looked me in the eyes in an unfinished kitchen and said the truest sentence I'd ever heard, and I spent 2 years proving I'd been listening. The window seat still catches the October light exactly the way Mark drew it. We sit there most evenings. Maya says that's the difference between a house that mourns someone and a house that simply remembers him. And I think, of everything anyone has ever said to me in that kitchen, that might be the one I'll carry the longest. If you made it to the end, thank you. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one, and every location surprises me. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe. A new one arrives every week. I'll see you in the next one. This is a work of fiction. All names, locations, events, and characters in this story are entirely invented for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.